Hi, this is DarkFox127 and welcome to another Skyrim Creation Kit tutorial video. In today's video I'm going to be covering how to create a merchant. Now this is a video that I have done in the past, but it was quite a while ago and that video is rather outdated. I can now actually show a few things that I missed back then that are pretty good and will make your merchant a lot more detailed, including one special feature you'll see at the end of the video, which I'll also be showing when we're setting it up. So the first thing you want to do is obviously go ahead, either build a store with an interior and put your merchant in, or you can go ahead and do what I've done and set up a small store just for the purpose of the video up in Solitude with the rest of them. And I've gone ahead and created my actor, so that's what you're really going to want to do. Go ahead, create yourself an actor. If you're unsure on how to set up a good NPC, then you can go ahead and check out my detailed followers tutorial. It's a pretty old video, but a lot of it's still relevant and it will cover a lot of what I'm not going to be going over in this video. So a lot of the basics of MPC creation, I'm sort of just going to glaze over it. So first of all, I have ID'd my actor as DF127 actor Brian. I've named him Brian because why not? I'm going to tick the flags for essential so he can't be killed because I don't like my merchants to die. And I'm also going to tick unique because he's going to be one of a kind. And as soon as I've ticked flags in here, I tend to confirm and then go back in. It's just good practice to make sure things get ticked correctly and don't sort of knock off, because certain settings like to do that. Now under the traits, the most important thing is the voice type. Now voice types are very important with merchants because if you select the wrong voice type for the type of merchant you're using, it's going to end up with blank dialogue and things are not going to work correctly. So in my case at the moment, I've got male Nord. However, I would like to make an alchemist. So that's going to be apothecary. And that stuff's going to be judged in faction as to what dialogue he's exactly going to try and use. Now, to make sure I've got a voice type that's compatible with alchemist, I am going to go under miscellaneous and form list. And I'm going to type in voice. Now you get a list of all different form lists with all different voice types. And what you can see is various things here like apothecary, which we're going to need, blacksmith, and the voices for things like hunters or lumberjacks. So if I just double click into apothecary, you'll see that it lists all the voice types that are compatible with this bit of dialogue. Now, as you can see, male Nord is not in here, so I'm going to have to select either male young eager or male old grumpy. So because he's much younger than that, I'm going to go with male young eager. Scroll down and you'll find this one pretty much hidden away at the bottom of all the unique voices. So male young eager, and if I just move that out of the way, close that now, I don't need it. That's perfectly fine. So I'm going to go under stats. Stats, pretty basic. You don't have to do anything major here. You can do this to whatever you really want. I've set them to just level 22, auto calculate. And you can of course set the class to an actual vendor if you wish, but again, you can mess with this any way that you want. Factions, I've already added 2 factions, which I always like to do in my NPCs to keep things pretty much with vanilla. And that is a crime faction and a town faction. So I've got town solitude faction. This makes sure he's just friendly with all the other NPCs in the town with the same faction. And crime faction is pretty important because otherwise if you steal items from him, he's not going to be reporting the crime to the right people. So as it is now, if you perform any sort of crime against him, you'll get bounty with Harfinger, which is fine. So they're pretty important. Now, the other factions we're going to need, you are definitely going to need the merchants faction. So job merchant faction, add that one in. And the dialogue is judged by the next faction. Now, if you want him to just be generic and say, you know, all kinds of things, this and that, some may call it junk, then you can just leave this faction I'm going to add out. But if there is a faction for the specific job that you're going to have your merchant do, so in this case, apothecary, job apothecary faction, and you've matched the voice up with what was in them form lists, pick that. So job apothecary or for whatever one you like. So there's probably going to be one for blacksmith as well. And then you'd check for the blacksmith voice types. So for this, it's going to be apothecary. Now there is another faction we're going to need in here, but I can't add that just yet. We'll have to make it later on in the tutorial, which you'll see. But there are other options for factions. Now, because he's a street vendor, if I had the right dialogue, which at the moment I don't think I do, I could add street vendor. Now, there are very limited ones. The ones here in Solitude can shout out various different things about produce or fresh fish, which I'm sure we're all aware of. And if you've got the right voice type, which you can probably check somewhere in here, that can work as well. If you add the Job Street vendor faction, they'll actually shout out if their voice matches. If not, nothing's probably going to happen. But you can add that. In this case, I'm not going to bother with it. Now, if you have a Khajiit, you can also use the Khajiit Caravan job faction. So there is one somewhere here. I think it's actually Caravan. There is one. I'm not entirely sure which one it is, but yeah, it might well be Caravan Merchant. And one of those is going to allow them to shout out like the Khajiits do for all the wares and weapons and things that they have. So you can go ahead and add that one if you've got a Khajiit. Again, I'm not going to use that, but you can experiment around with it. So that's all the factions right now that we're going to need. I'm just going to confirm that and then reopen it. So I'm going to research my actor, open it back up. Relationships, keywords, don't really need. AI data, the only thing I'd note here that's pretty interesting and worth looking at is their confidence, whether they're cowardly and run away if you steal something and just report to the guards, or whether they're more on the foolhardy side and they're going to probably try and stab you if you steal their stuff. I'm going to have this on brave because I think Brian's going to be a pretty big beast of a man. And yeah, you can set other things, help friends and allies and all sorts. AI packages, this is going to be more necessary if you do things like lock lists, which is something I might cover in the future. So if they have their own store that they need to lock up and you want to give them quite a nice life, you can have them sleep, eat, drink, fart, do whatever you want. I'm not going to bother with AI packages in this video. That's something for another day. You can pretty much mess around with this stuff and set what you like. I'm just going to link him to his marker, which we'll see shortly. Inventory, this is where things can get really interesting. By default, I've added a few things that I think he'd like to carry in his inventory, which includes an iron dagger, lantern, and some mead. And I've given him some clothes and a default sleep outfit. I always bother to add default sleep outfit, even though the game doesn't do it. There are a couple of mods out there that can use the default sleep outfits and implement that into the game. So if I just hit full, here's Brian. He's all geared up, good to go. Now, geared up weapons, I believe this can work, where you'll set it to 0, so it will unequip any weapons he has on, and you can also do that via packages. So, because he's a merchant, he's probably not going to want to be sort of armed to the teeth. He's going to want to be pretty just normal. The other thing to mention with inventory is what tends to happen, you'll see shortly when we create our container for our merchants, is they will sell anything within their merchant container that links up with the kind of items they're supposed to be selling. However, what will also happen is if I was to have any apothecary items in here, they can also get thrown into his selling inventory. So when you're asking to buy things, you'll notice things from his inventory show up. Now, this is just a default bug with the game, which as I understand there isn't really a fix to, but it can also be used to your advantage. So if you have any items that are pretty unique that you'd like him to sell and you only want him to sell them once, then you can add them to his inventory. And as long as they're the kind of items that he sells, so it's like a potion or an ingredient, he'll be able to sell it once. So that's kind of a good thing that you can abuse and use to your advantage. But yeah, he will sell items in his inventory that match his sort of vendor type, so be aware of that. Now the rest, spell lists, sounds, animations, attack data, facial features, all that you can do yourself. I don't need to guide you through that if you watch my other video. So I'm just going to confirm for now. And I'm going to highlight my actor. A lot of people still don't know this. And then if you do Control and F4, it will export the face data. So click yes and make sure you include that in your BSA if you're uploading this mod to the Nexus or some other place. You'll see the render window all gets knocked off as well, so I'll have to reopen that. But yeah, just make sure you do that. So I'm just going to see if that wants to load. Now the next thing that we are going to need to do is get a container that all of his items are going to be sold through, and then we'll go and add a faction to him. So I'm just going to zoom this out for a moment, let that load all of its stuff. It's going to be quite a pain to work with. So let's go under World Objects and Containers, and I'm going to search for Merchant. Now, although I don't recommend that you duplicate a merchant to play around with, I do recommend that you duplicate a merchant chest to begin with. So if you type in merchant, you'll get all of the chests, or nearly all of them that are in the game. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to narrow this down to apothecary. So I've got 2 to choose from here. I'm going to choose the top one, and I'm going to rename this to whatever I want it to be. So df127 container, if I could type today, merchant Brian. Now what you can do is you can name this if you like and place it into the world, but I strongly recommend that you just put this into the void as it's common practice. So I'm just going to create that as a new form and research for it. Dump the container in. So yeah, common practice to put it in the void out of the player's reach because it's their items that they're going to sell and you don't really want to interfere with it. However, if you really want, you can go to the lock tab, lock it up, set a level, and then you can let the player kind of steal things if you really want. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put it out the void, out the way, put it far enough down so that the player can't get access to it, and continue on. So I'm going to keep the view over that for now. Now I'm just going to go back in. There are a few interesting things to do with containers. The first thing that you want to do is make sure that you have respawn ticked. Otherwise, after 3 or 5 days, if you bought everything or certain items, they're not going to refresh, they're not going to get new stock, and they're going to be pretty useless after that. So the reason I told you to duplicate is because a lot of the work is already going to be done for you. As you can see, all sort of leveled items, things that they can sell. And there are a couple of things to take note of. You'll see Perk Master Trader Gold. You're probably going to want to make sure that this is in here because when you get the perk for adding more gold to merchants, this is going to be used. The way this works is it has a global variable for the game's actual setting for that perk that it checks to see if it's meant to be here, and it'll put the gold in, and it'll do all that automatically without worrying. So make sure you got the Perk Master Gold in. There's also something else which doesn't seem to be in this container, and that is for the investor perk. So if I search investor, go under items and leveled item, you'll see you have one for all sorts of stores. Now, I can't really show you how to implement this into your own actor, especially if you're using vanilla dialogue, because the dialogue box gets very slow, unresponsive, and I don't recommend changing the perk investor quest anyway. So you're probably best leaving this off your merchant. So if they have one of these in the container, remove it, because these are for very specific NPCs. And what would happen if you used one of these in your container is when you actually invest in one of these people's shops, the one that's in here is also going to add more gold to your own merchant, which wouldn't make a lot of sense because you're not investing in this guy's shop, you're investing in somebody else's. So make sure that's not in there. But yeah, these work off the same sort of ideas. It would have its very own global variable that would be checked, and it goes and adds 500 gold, which is what you usually invest. Now, if you were doing custom dialogue, you could set that system up, which I've done myself for my own mods, but that's going to be for another video if I do manage to cover that eventually. So this is all looking pretty good to me. I can go ahead and add new items if I so wish. I, however, am not going to bother. And there's another thing I am now going to mention. What you can do is you can add items to the side of his store that you can actually sell. Now, if I go under magic and potion, because he's going to sell kind of alchemy things, I'm just going to wipe that out. I'm going to just search manually. I'm going to put some kind of poisons and such on the side. Now I'm going to place one down, double click, and I'm going to go under ownership. And under here, I'm going to want to set this to his factions. This is where faction comes in. I'm probably best making the faction first. And what you can do, you'll actually be able to sell various items. So I'm going to keep that there for a second. Hover back over the chest. Now we're going to go under character and faction. I said there was one faction we need to add, and we don't have it yet. I'm going to do a new faction. I'm going to give this an ID of faction and Brian. So name, Brian's faction. I don't think that's all that necessary, but we'll do it anyway. Go under general, make sure can be owner, or half the things we need aren't going to work here. Click on the vendor tab, ignore the other two. Click on vendor. And you'll see there's a number of other options that have appeared. Now, first of all, I'm going to go to merchant container, select reference in render window, and I'm going to double click on my chest. So this is the stuff that he's going to sell, anything within there that we've got set up. Now, don't tick only buy stolen items. This is to do with fences, and that option alone will not set fences up. That might be a later tutorial that I'll be creating that. So don't worry about that right now. We're not making a fence in this video. Now, under start and end hour, I'm going to go pretty basic, and this is on the 24-hour clock, so make sure you get your numbers right, between 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening, which would be 18. Location, this gets pretty important. One thing I have observed that doesn't work is what it's on by default, which is near editor location, which is wherever it's placed in the world. Don't use that. Doesn't tend to work, not in my experience. You want to use some other ones. You want to experiment and do a bit of trial and error. Now you can do in cell, which might well work, but the safest one to do, especially with the setup I'm doing where you can sell items around him, is to select a reference. Now you'll notice I can't actually select what I wanted to select, which is the store. Now if you do want to select something as a reference and it's not having it, you'll have to put a reference ID. So what I could do is df127ref stall for Brian, confirm that, and it should let me select it. And that's pretty good because everything's going to be sat on the stall. It makes sense to kind of select that. And what you want to do is a radius. So a good radius select by default is usually 256. You can up this if you want. Let's put like 512, pretty much the standards, or 1024. Anything within that radius that he owns, he's going to be able to sell. So I'm going to put 256. That should be good enough. Now vendor buy sell list. This is where you'll get his vendor list, all the kind of items he can sell. And you have various default ones from the game itself, but you can create your own. So in this case, I'll probably be using vendor item apothecary. So if I go under miscellaneous and go to form list and type in the word vendor, I'll see a list of all these that are selectable in here. Now if we go to apothecary, you'll notice the form list has a list of keywords for items that can be sold. So anything with these keywords can appear in his inventory. For selling items, so in that container they'll show up when you go to buy them. Now like I said, you can go ahead, create your own custom one, and the way you do that is make a new form list, go into keywords and dump in the vendor items that you want to be selling, drag and drop, nice and simple. But for this I'm going to keep it as apothecary. Now if you select miscellaneous, so he sells all kinds of junk and accepts anything, you can go vendor items misc, and if you do that you're going to want to tick this box here, not sell or buy. Now I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do apothecary for this guy. Vendor conditions, you could do some cool stuff like he doesn't want to come out if it's raining and things like that, or restrict to like you have to have done a quest before he's available. You can do all sorts of kind of stuff. I'll leave you to kind of experiment with vendor conditions, but you're probably best not using that if you just want a simple merchant with no restrictions. And that should be it for him, so I'm going to click OK. And what I want to do is go back into my actor first of all before I forget, and I want to set up his faction. So this is the last one we want to add. So new, the one that we just made. Faction Brian. Click OK. And just save that. And I'm going to link him to that marker because we didn't add any packages to him. So if I link him to something, if you link any actor to a piece of furniture, whether there's a nav mesh or not, they're going to be able to just attach themselves to it and stay put. And that's what they'll do by default. So that's pretty useful for our testing. And like I said, I have placed a bottle on here. I've set it up now so that he'll be able to sell anything within the vicinity that is under his ownership. So if we double click on this here and we go under ownership and faction and type his faction in, that means his merchant faction is going to be able to allow him to actually sell that. And when you go ahead and buy this within the menu for buying items, you'll see it disappear off the side, which is really cool. And like I said at the start, that's something a lot of people weren't even aware existed, which is fantastic. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to duplicate some of these, and when we buy them, when we go in game, you'll see they disappear. So there we go. And you are better off sort of selecting them, setting everything up, and then duplicating them from there. Otherwise you have to set the things for every individual one.
Fruit, fresh off the boat, the freshest in Skyrim.
Okay, so here we are in game, and I'm just going to speak to Yarla and show you how the default game handles this.
See for yourself.
You'll see she's got some leek and carrots on the side, and what will happen when we buy them is they'll slowly disappear. So you'll see there, I'm buying the carrots and they're disappearing, and there's some leeks as well. Buy all the leeks and they disappear off the store. And that's what we've set up with those potions on Brian's store as well. So let's go over to Brian.
What can I do for it? So, you're interested in my potions and ingredients?
You'll also notice his dialogue is correct with apothecary stuff. And you'll notice in the tutorial just I actually made a slight error. I put the wrong faction in there. It should be the job faction apothecary. I put something like Windhelm related or something when I researched for it. But yeah, just make sure you've got the right one in there. And if we just turn the camera a bit.
Ah, so you're an alchemist then.
You'll see our potions on the side. We'll buy some of those. And they slowly disappear.
Until next time.
So also, I mentioned the fact that he can get a little bit annoyed if you attack him or commit any crime.
What do you think you're doing?
You'll see the bounty's gotten added to Halffinger. He actually got a weapon out. He was willing to stab me. He didn't run off because we set him as brave. So, yeah, pretty good. He'll react in the same way if you steal things as well. And that is it for another Skyrim Creation Kit tutorial video, so I hope you found it useful. Please let me know in the comments section below. You can, of course, check everything else that I do on my website at www.darkfox127.co.uk, and you can check me out on social media and all that good stuff. All the links will be on there. Hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Thank you very much for watching. I'll speak to you next time.